CTV News, 8th of March 2023, Chinese Canadians walk a tightrope in politics at a time when there is a lot of talk about foreign influence. The Chinese government can use hostage diplomacy and other kinds of blackmail to put pressure on Chinese born on the mainland. Mark Lee is a professional translator and was once a candidate for council in Richmond, BC. He says he knows what it's like for Chinese Canadians who want to get into politics but are worried about alleged foreign influence to walk a fine line. He says he is aware of the risks and thinks that the possibility of political meddling is a big problem that needs to be fixed. Lee, who ran poorly for the Richmond Citizens Association last year, said, "I've seen things that I think are suspicious or that I don't agree with coming out of places like the Chinese consulate." But he is also worried that Chinese Canadians will be judged by the company they keep and that cultural dynamics could be misunderstood during a debate about political interference that has been going on in Chinese communities for years but has recently gotten more attention and led to calls for a public investigation. "Some people in Richmond thought that if you had any link with certain groups, you must be a Chinese government spy or something like that," said Lee, who lives in the most Chinese-populated city in Canada. Chinese Canadians from all sides of the political spectrum share Lee's worries. They worry about interference from Chinese authorities, a lack of nuance, racism, and the use of the argument to drive a wedge between ethnic Chinese communities. The Globe and Mail newspaper said last month that China worked to help the Liberal minority win the 2021 federal election and to get rid of conservative politicians that Beijing didn't like Kenny Chiu, who lost his place in Steveston, Richmond East. Chiu says he is distraught that foreign interference may have affected his election loss. Still, he also worries about oversimplification and the idea that Canadians with ties to China are more likely to be involved. He said doing so would help foreign countries influence the results of Canadian elections and put Canada's multicultural society in danger. Chiu said that the key is to fight racism no matter the victim's race or culture. This will make it less likely that racism will be used to turn Canadians against each other. "They know that this is a way to get into Canadian society," Chiu said of the possibility of Chinese interference and racist charges. He also said there wasn't enough nuance in the conversation, and he was alarmed by some of the comments he heard. For example, if you were from Taiwan, you must be for democracy, freedom, and justice, which isn't always true. Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservatives, and Jagmeet Singh, leader of the New Democratic Party, have asked for a full public inquiry into foreign interference in Canadian elections. However, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been against this. Poilievre said on March 1 that people in the Chinese Canadian community are wonderful and are hurt by foreign meddling. He also said that any investigation should look into how to protect people from Beijing. "The Chinese who live in Canada want to be loyal. They love our country and stay true to it." Poilievre said they need our security and that it is absolutely unacceptable for them to be harassed or scared by evil foreign powers like China. Kenneth Tung hosts a news talk show on Chinese language radio AM 1470. He used to chair an organization that helps immigrants in Vancouver called Success. Tung said it would be wrong to think that any scrutiny of Chinese Canadian leaders was due to racism. He said Canadians with racial, cultural, linguistic, or other ties to China shouldn't have trouble if their acts are based on Canadian values. "I think it's essential to make it clear, as Canadian Hong Kongers or Canadian Chinese, we don't need to defend an issue, especially ones that will confuse observers if we are supporting the Beijing government," Tung said. He also said, "If it has to do with the Beijing regime and isn't a Canadian value, we should be against it." In 2016, when the Chinese flag was raised at City Hall to celebrate Chinese National Day, Vancouver City Councillor Carrie Jiang and other officials, such as the Chinese Consul General at the time, Liu Fei, wore red neckerchiefs. This made some people upset. Critics said the knotted scarves were a communist symbol. Still, the event organizer, Ma Xiaoxin, said a provider misunderstood what kind of scarves were needed, according to papers released after a Freedom of Information request. Zhang, a third-generation Chinese Canadian, said, "I clearly remember getting hate mail and death threats. No one ever told me what to do or tried to change my mind," he said. Zhang said he had met officials from many countries, including China, when he was in politics. He said that didn't mean that he was a spy from China. He said that hints aren't as good as proof. Zhang said, "If there is evidence that you should charge someone, you should put them in jail for messing with our elections. Or, if it was an ambassador from any country, send them home. Have them kicked out." Li says that the debate isn't making him want to stay away from politics, and he plans to run again in the next municipal race. He thinks Chinese Canadians must be involved in politics because their interactions with Chinese authorities have given them a pretty realistic understanding of how they work. Li thinks that Chinese Canadians have a role beyond being seen as either victims or causes of foreign meddling. Instead, he wants them to be more significant in figuring out the risks. "Maybe Chinese Canadians like me have a bit more cultural knowledge or a little more understanding of how this kind of interference can look," he says.